Type 2 diabetes is a heterogeneous disease primarily characterized by a deficit in both insulin secretion and insulin action, which consequently causes an increase in plasma glucose. There are approximately 1.2 million cases of type 2 diabetes in Australia, with 280 new cases each day. That's approximately 100,000 new cases each year. Type 2 diabetes makes up to 90% of all cases of diabetes, with regional and remote areas having a higher rate than major cities. 60 to 69 years presents the largest number of cases, with 775,000 people with type 2 diabetes being 60 years or older. Two main contributing causes have been identified for type 2 diabetes. The first is genetic makeup, where abnormalities in genes and molecules involved in insulin action affect blood glucose regulation. Environmental factors such as obesity cause decreased muscle mass, which induces insulin resistance. Insufficient energy consumption results from increased fat and simple sugar intake and decreased starch and dietary fibre intake. These overall factors cause insulin resistance and impaired insulin secretion, the major characteristics of type 2 diabetes. Three major changes occur as a result of insulin resistance. They include impaired insulin-mediated glucose uptake, incomplete suppression of hepatic glucose output, and impaired triglyceride uptake. In normal physiology of skeletal muscle, insulin is able to promote glycogenesis and inhibit glycogenolysis. Upon insulin binding to a receptor, glucose enters skeletal muscle via a GLUT4 transporter, and the transcription of glucokinase and glycogen synthase occurs. These enzymes are responsible for the glycogenesis pathway. Alternatively, the presence of insulin inhibits the transcription of glycogen phosphorylase and glucose-6-phosphatase. These enzymes are responsible for glycogenolysis. In cases of type 2 diabetes, however, insulin is unable to bind and consequently blood glucose is unable to be stored. Additionally, as the cells become more energy-starved, the body compensates by performing glycogenolysis, further increasing glucose concentrations. A further result of insulin resistance is incomplete suppression of hepatic glucose output. Due to the low levels of glucose and therefore energy within cells, the body secretes glucagon in an attempt to resolve these imbalances. Glucagon is able to bind directly on a hepatocyte receptor, which ultimately results in gluconeogenesis, the production of glucose from other sources. This glucose is then released into the bloodstream, causing an increase in blood glucose concentration. The final result of insulin resistance causes impaired triglyceride uptake by fat. This insulin resistance causes increased fatty acids in the bloodstream as a result of an inability to store them. To compensate for these imbalances in glucose and fatty acid, the body tries to overcome this by increasing insulin secretion. However, in response to this, insulin receptors undergo downregulation, triggering an even greater secretion of insulin for the same response. The second characteristic of type 2 diabetes is impaired insulin secretion. Once hyperglycemia exists, beta cell dysfunction exists because the cells begin to be overworked. This has several effects, including a decrease in insulin secretion in its cephalic phase, decreased effective hormones responsible for decreasing blood glucose, as well as inefficient proinsulin to insulin processing. Beta cell dysfunction is thought to be brought about by three mechanisms. The first is genetic defects. The second is in utero malnutrition. This type of malnutrition may lead to insufficient beta cell development and later partial insulin secretory defect. The final mechanism is the unfavourable metabolic environment. The nature of processed foods in society today has caused increased glucose levels that may induce glucotoxicity and lipotoxicity. However, it must be noted that this is a progressive set of changes which ultimately results in decreased pancreatic cell mass, cascading to function and long-term control of blood glucose. These long-term effects lead to a set of signs and symptoms that can be quite distinct, including being excessively thirsty, passing more urine, feeling tired and lethargic, always feeling hungry, and having cuts that heal slowly. Despite this, it is recognised that these symptoms are quite mild and may go undiscovered for years. Only when undergoing routine medical checkups or screening tests is type 2 diabetes usually discovered. So how do we treat it? Treatment for type 2 diabetes is not curative, but rather preventative of further complications. It requires early intervention in the form of lifestyle improvements to avoid glucotoxicity, lipotoxicity, and associated complications with the disease.